Stop staring at my Amiga behind there. That's not the point of the video. That's better. Alright. Now what we have here is a Power Macintosh 6100/66. It is one of the first, if not the first, Power Macintosh that has a PowerPC processor in it. 66 indicating the clock speed, 66 megahertz, and it comes with a bunch of quirks. Let me just show you what I find particularly annoying about this model, as much as I like it. It is adapter palooza, or it can be. Let's quickly go over the ports, or some of the ports, and I'll show you what I mean. Now, as you can see here, it has the standard power input, output. There's an external SCSI interface, ADB, and serial ports for your keyboard, mouse, printer, modem, etc. connections, and audio in out, as well as a reset and I believe an interrupt switch. Where's the networking, you might ask? That's right here. That is not just an AUI, that is an AAUI port. And that can be converted to a regular Ethernet cable through a bunch of adapters, and here's just one of them. You can see here is the regular Ethernet port and the AUI, and various third-party companies made their own kind of adapters. This one here, as you can see, is an Apple one. This, I believe, is Dana Communications. So both of these work to connect it to a regular Ethernet cable. The other thing you might be wondering about is where on here is the video port? Well, it is this strange contraption over here, and that is called, I believe, an HDI 45 port. High density interface, I believe, is what the HDI stands for, and I think it was designed to carry video signal as well as some other signals that you could use to hook up a keyboard, a mouse, and other things. So didn't really survive that much beyond the first line of PowerPC computers. I believe there was only one monitor ever made for this type of interface. But if you're not that lucky to have that monitor and you have to put up with something like this, which is a nice monitor by the way, you have to get one of these other adapters. And this is a thick and not very pliable adapter to change this to a EB15 port, I believe, which this monitor supports. If you don't have one of those either, you need to get yet another adapter to just change this to a regular VGA port instead. So there's yet another thing that will probably prevent you from pushing this all the way back on your desk against the wall, because this one does need a little bit of room to go behind the computer and then connect it with your monitor. The other thing that I like about this machine, but adds yet another set of adapters, is that it comes with one of these. This is actually the DOS compatible version, and note it's not IBM compatible, it is just DOS compatible. So what this does is, this is an entire almost IBM compatible PC on a single board. Under here is a 486 processor, Intel. I think I've upgraded that to a DX2 66 megahertz, and to the maximum amount of RAM possible. I don't recall how much that is. It says it right here, 32 megabytes. It does come with a Sound Blaster implementation, which is on this daughter board. And then there are various things that you can do with this. You can either have that share the same monitor as the Macintosh, or you can hook up a second monitor to it. However, it does need this contraption here to fully make use of it. One of these connects, I believe it's this port, it goes straight to the monitor, and then the rest of it you can use to hook up to the video output here, so you can share one monitor between Macintosh and DOS mode, or leave that connection and just have a second monitor on here. The other port that this card supports is for a joystick, and you have to be kind of careful and make sure that you plug in the, right type of equipment to the right port, because as you can see here, the video one looks identical to the joystick one, and if you're unlucky you can actually destroy the card if you're doing it wrong. But pay attention to the symbols here. This clearly has a joystick symbol, this one has a monitor symbol. I have to admit, managed to plug it in the wrong way once. Fortunately, it did not damage the machine, and it usually comes with this handy little plug here, or cover here, to make sure that you only use this for joysticks and not the default monitor implementation. So that is one thing to take care of. But if you decide to stick this into the back of the DOS compatibility card and connect it with the video output here, you will have to use this cable alongside with this adapter here. And that makes for a nice cable mess at the back of the machine. Not a fan of it, but let's move on to why I like this machine and what I've done to it. Let's focus on the case first. The shielding on the top of the case was covered with a lot of rust. So what I had to do is snip off all of the plastic welding that was holding it in place, and you can see that here and a bunch of other pieces. So that's easy to do with side cutters. And I scraped off all of the rust with sandpaper or a wire brush, and then cleaned it off and coated it with a clear coat that is supposed to stop the rust. And let me show you real quick what I usually use for that. It is Rust-Oleum, as it says here, stops rust. And it doesn't really matter what you use. You can use any kind of color that you choose. I chose clear so that the original sheen is somewhat retained. It would look kind of funny if it were black or blue or some other color. The most important thing is that you really stop any new moisture and oxygen getting to the metal and continue kind of the rusting process. The other thing that this thing is prone to is brittle plastics, and specifically those two tabs at the back is often what you see broken off if you look at listings on eBay or Facebook Marketplace or wherever. Fortunately, those two are still intact, and I do intend to keep it that way by potentially heating them up slightly with hot air when I put it back on, but it can also be fixed. The other thing that broke is the back piece of the ejector button for the CD-ROM, and so what I had to do was I needed to source a replacement, which is simply stuck on here with a piece of double-sided tape to fix that, because I couldn't make the original one work. I still have it somewhere, I'll have to try that. And then various bits and pieces in the case broke as I took out the motherboard and all the other components for cleaning and restoration. Those are easy to put back. Just use any form of kind of plastic cement. The one that I used for this one here happens to be this specific product here. it works pretty well. It essentially melts the two pieces of plastic uh, and you press them together, and once it hardens, the bond is as strong as before in most cases. Now, I have not recapped the board yet. I know I should do it. I know capacitors will leak over time. Even if they don't physically leak liquid, they may lose their capacitance. And so it is a good idea to recap that at some point, but it is one of the more robust ones that usually work pretty well. I have tested this machine several times. It works pretty well. The floppy needed to be cleaned. I've lubricated some of the parts in there. I believe it does read and eject floppies correctly. Power supply, not recapped either. I know it needs to be done at some point, so power supply and logic board recapping is two of the things that I need to do. What's this? You might think that's the hard drive of the machine. This is a SCSI 2 SD board that I had to put in there because the original drive was broken. Working SCSI hard drives are hard to come by, and frankly, if you don't necessarily like that whirring noise that these make and you can do without that, what's the point of spending hundreds of dollars on a replacement drive if that is likely to fail in the next year anyway? So I've put that in here. There is a fresh install of macOS on here. I believe it is 7 dot something, maybe 8 dot something, I don't remember. We'll look at that in a moment. The other thing I did was, let me put this out of the way for a moment. You can't see that properly, but there is some wiring that goes underneath the bracket for the hard drive. And what I've done there is I installed a little extra fan under here. There is a grate at the bottom of the case that lets air in, but other than this, there is no other fan in this case. There is one on the power supply which sucks the air in through all the different openings in the case and pushes it back out, but that's it. Now, many people will say that this first generation of a PowerPC processor that Apple used, it doesn't really produce that much heat. But when you run this machine for some time, you will notice it actually does. This area gets quite hot. The other contributing factor is, put this back on here, if you're operating this with the DOS compatibility card. As you can see, the 486 has a heatsink on it, but if it's installed and it goes in like this, you'll notice that the processor is right above the PowerPC processor. And so those two heat sources together will produce quite a lot of heat. And if you don't do anything extra about airflow, I have seen this thing shut off because of overheating. It happened once only. I was surprised, but it happens. And so I've added a little fan down here. If I remember what the part numbers are, I will put them down in the description. It's a relatively easy mod to make. You have to siphon off some power from one of the Molex connectors and get a readily available connection for the fan in here. So I'll show you. And there's a few simple screws that you put in, and that usually fixes the problem. Now let's put this back together and I'll show you a little bit about how it works. this has the power button at the front. If the battery doesn't work, I think you sometimes have to do like a double press in order to make it work. So it looks like we have a slight problem with the video cable. If it's not connected properly, it'll display the wrong colors. So let me fix that. I'll be right back. Alright, so let's try and turn this on again. Looks like the HDI cable was not in all the way. So let's try this again and see if the colors are coming up correctly now. That is in fact one of the problems, that with all the space that these cables need at the back, if you squish them together too much, they might pop out of their socket. Yeah, and as you can see here now, the color problem is fixed and it looks just fine. So you need a lot of space in between the base unit and the monitor to account for all the cables. It's not loading the fastest, although it is using a flash storage device and not a mechanical drive. Alright, so this is running Mac OS 8.5, and the way to interact with the compatibility card, the DOS compatibility card, is through one of the control panels. In this case, it's PC setup. The version I use is 1.5, and I will try and put a link to the correct version of the software from either Macintosh Garden or one of those sites down in the description. It is very important to not use the latest one on this. There have been newer cards, newer versions of this card, that will not work with this one. It may appear to work. It will show a similar screen. It will allow you to install or create a virtual disk. It will allow you to install DOS, but then when you try to boot off of that image into the DOS environment, it will not work. And I have sat over this for hours, completely reinstalling the operating system. This was originally running 9.2. I thought that was the issue. I downgraded, used the same PC setup software, still didn't work. So it really needs the right version that goes with that card in order for it to work correctly. Now, the first thing they usually do is you set up a virtual disk, and you can set up various ones. And you can do new drive file, and you pick any directory, any space on your hard drive to create the image file, name it whatever you want. Depending on the size, it takes some time to create that, and then you can launch into it. And I won't go through this process right now, but what I will do is switch to the PC, and what it will do is, you can see here it's starting as DOS, and oops, missing some network drivers, blah blah blah. What it will do is, if you start this from scratch, you will see a little kind of fake BIOS message up here, and then it will behave like a PC that has nothing on the hard drive. So it will ask you for a bootable device, and you can use the regular floppy drive to use DOS floppy disks to install MS-DOS, install Windows on top of that. It works just like a regular PC would on an empty hard drive. You would use F-disk to set up the disk and then set up to install MS-DOS on that drive. And then with that, it behaves just like any other PC. I've also installed Windows for Workgroups 3.11 on here. Haven't quite figured out how to make use of the networking capabilities. Yes, it keeps complaining about that. But there are drivers available for some of the Macintosh Apple-specific hardware that needs to be installed on the DOS and Windows environment for all of these things to work. There is a hotkey. I have to figure out which one it is here. Yes, it is Command Return. We can flip between the DOS and the Macintosh environment, so these two run side by side. You cannot run this thing in a window, so you can see them all side by side. It's either or. But I believe if you use two different monitors, you can show them side by side, but can only control one of them at a time. There's also support for the built-in CD-ROM drive, obviously. I believe that's how I installed Windows, if I remember correctly. Now, why do I like this machine? I can use and play some of my favorite games that I'm used to from my childhood, my teenage years, both on the Macintosh and the DOS and or Windows platform on the same machine. It's obviously a relatively small form factor, so it combines the best of both worlds. If I didn't have that thing over there, the Amiga 2000, which can actually do all three of those things. Amiga, IBM compatible, and Macintosh. But we'll get to that in another video. Thank you for watching.